Yeah, done with my Oreo.
Okay, good.
Do we really know what happened? The brother did.
The brother, that's what I thought too.
I mean, that seems like kind of obvious.
Hey, do you want to talk about death?
Yeah. I mean,
Murdery thingy.
Oh, I love our
That
high
was
fives.
good, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome to Mystery Murdery Thingy.
Where we do mysteries.
And murderies.
And thingies.
Yeah.
And Chloe.
I'm Mario.
I'm Chloe.
And I'm Mario.
That's Mario.
And you're Chloe.
Do we sound the same? I feel like on the phone you sound like me.
I don't think we sound the same at all.
When you call your... This doesn't happen to you because you don't have a landline.
You think that I sound like you on the phone.
Sometimes, yeah.
So when we're talking to each other on the phone, you think you're talking to yourself? Or something?
Let's start over. Let's start over.
No, this is good. I like this. I like where this is going. We're finding things out we didn't know. Okay.
I'm very excited. I have a little rhyme for you.
Okay, go.
I have a history mystery.
Nice.
Haha.
Good job. You know I like a good history mystery. Mine's kind of a history mystery too. It's kind of the theme for the week, so yeah.
For our history buffs, listen
I like
in.
history.
I think for me it's more the
nerdy.
people. I like learning about people and why they do things the way they do.
Which is kind of like a modern way of looking at history, right? Like this kind of like re-examination of history through the eyes of like the common man as opposed to like the great man theory or great person theory, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It is definitely a lot more interesting. It's more like anthropology. You know, like how did these people live? What did they think about? You know, like when you look at like Pompeii, right?
Yeah.
Where you can literally see them in motion, you know, or going about daily tasks, you know. It's really tragic, but it also gives you this, like, crazy, you know, sense of how life really was back then.
Does that always happen when volcanoes erupt?
If you're in a certain zone, and if it's an eruption of a certain type. But there aren't that many places, you know, where there's, like, fairly large habitations, like, right next to a volcano. Not to say that it doesn't happen. It happens today, too, but, you know. Probably shouldn't. It's probably not a great idea.
What was so special about that volcano?
That it, you know, erupted in such a way that it blasted out this superheated air and, you know, the ash and everything that covered Pompeii, you know, much more quickly than anyone could get away from it, right? So people are seen, like, running away, but, like, they're caught in that motion because the superheated air immediately killed them, right? And the ash and everything was of such a magnitude that it just covered everything. So it caught them in mid-motion. So when it was excavated, you can see that person, like, running or fall. I mean, like, it's crazy. So it like, created a snapshot in time. That's why it's not a unique, you know, archaeological find, but almost unique, yeah.
This is a little bit of what did you say? A snapshot of history?
A snapshot of history. I like that metaphor, right?
A snapshot of history.
Right. It's almost like you were, like, with...
Episode title.
With Mr. Peabody, you know, and you went back and you brought a camera with you.
We
were talking about Mr. Peabody and, what's the kid's name?
Sherman,
right. Sherman and Mr. Peabody. It was a long time ago when I was watching Rocky and Bullwinkle. We probably should have done this at the beginning. We are giving out our first Patreon shout out.
Right, $1 gets you a shout out.
Thank you so much to Michelle for being our first real Patreon subscriber.
I'm snapping right now.
Good job. So, thanks for listening to us, you know, at work. And you know, thanks everybody for listening, even if you don't give us $1, but, you know, even more if you do. And $1 is all it takes. So,
definitely a little perk.
Yeah. So visit our Patreon if you want a shout out as well. And also I was going to do just a little corrections.
Okay.
So I got a couple of messages from a YouTube commenter that I wanted to include some information that she put on there. So this is from Wendy on YouTube, and she says that this is in reference to my Bigfoot episode from last time.
Ooh, okay.
So apparently she's referencing some more photos. You know how I had said that there's really only that photo from 07? Mm-hmm. There's also a photo by Patterson from 67 that she's pointing to that apparently would be good to look at. And a lot of other photos and videos since then, she says. Quote, but the government and certain members of the Bigfoot community pretend they're not authentic, close quote. Ooh. So, thank you, Wendy. Oh, and also, there apparently was a periodical, this is in reference to yours, on the cattle phenomena called Stigmata. So a whole periodical just on
How did I miss
phenomena.
that?
These things.
Internet.
The internet's a big place. She says that would be a great source if you can find copies. Apparently, it's not digitized, so that might also be why. But thank you so much, Wendy, for that information. We're always happy, if you've got other ideas or corrections or things you hear that don't sound quite right. Email us, post, a comment on YouTube, on iTunes, whatever. Tweet at us.
Follow us on Twitter.
Whatever. I don't think you can't message on Instagram, right?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, you can? Okay, so you can do that too.
Sign into my DMs. Mario, what does DM stand for?
Dick machine?
God damn it.
Is that not what it says?
God damn it, Mario.
Oh, is it direct message?
Yes,
Oh,
it
okay,
is.
Cool.
Ding, ding, ding. Sometimes I like to give Mario, millennial tests.
Right. Early millennial.
Yes.
Early millennial. I'm not a big tweeter. I have a tweeter. I have a tweeter. I did that on purpose.
Okay.
Anywho.
I'm talking about the mystery of the hanging coffins. Some of it is still happening today.
Really?
Yes. So coffins mysteriously found hundreds of feet high, okay, stored on cliffs. It's kind of a Stonehenge thing, right? And the same idea that how did they do this back then? And that's how yours, how did they do this back then? That's the
So when are these
question.
Actually from?
The oldest was dating back to the Tang Dynasty, which was 618.
618. Okay, so 618 AD.
618 to 907. Yeah.
Okay,
so
wow.
A long fucking time ago.
Yeah, definitely.
Thousands of years ago.
1400 years ago.
But to me, as I'm doing this research, I'm I feel like this is just a funeral rite and not as much as a why mystery. Why do they do this? I think
the mystery is more in the how.
It's more the how.
Okay.
And the fact that sorry.
But we don't know exactly why either, right? Because it's this kind of ancient culture that's
so
lost
part of it is that exactly.
Okay.
Part of it is the Bo people from China who were thought to go extinct.
Okay. And what region of China is this?
Southwest. So they're also found in Indonesia and the Philippines, but most of them are in China, and they're in remote valleys that are south of the Yangtze River. Mm-hmm. So they're various shapes that are carved mostly from one piece of wood, and they either lie on beams that project outward from vertical faces, like mountains or cliffs. Yeah, on beams. God. Or they're placed in caves that are found up high in the cliffs.
Okay.
Or they sit on natural rock projections on faces of the mountain.
Right, little outcrops. Sure.
Mountain faces.
Faces of the mountain.
Yes. So there's lots of ways that they're hanged. Mm-hmm. There's no clear reason, again, how they got there. So, theories. And a lot of them are very practical. So, prevented animals from destroying the bodies.
Sure.
Practical. It kept the land free to farm. Mm-hmm. So they didn't, waste land on cemeteries. In some places, the land eroded easily, and it was prone to sinkholes.
Sure.
So the higher the coffin, the more respect. That's another kind of theory in that we're like guessing why based on religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what the kind of like prevailing religion was, or the culture was in that area around that time.
So this is possibly part of that aspect. The higher the coffin, the more respect. Filial piety. Did I say that right?
Filial piety, yeah.
Filial piety, okay. In Confucianism and Chinese Buddhism ethics, the respect for your elders and ancestors is filial piety. Just that kind of, I don't know. I already said respect.
But it's, I think, even more than respect. It's the notion that they're like present in your life. That even when they go on to the afterlife, that they can still see what's going on. They can even still influence the goings on in our world to some extent, because they sort of become godlike in a way. They've entered like that, whatever aspect. I think that's the idea. I mean, I don't know too much about it.
Well, that's what it seems like to me. But on the most basic level, it's
and that's one reason why it's important to give them respect, because they know whether you've given them respect, and they can do things, based on whether you give them respect or not, right?
Kind of wisdom.
Yeah, they can give you stuff. It's always based on something like that, right? Some kind of reciprocal relationship.
Right. It's also possible that the bodies were first buried, and then once the body decomposed, they would place those bones in the coffins to be buried in the cliffs. But I don't know. I'm not really sure about that one.
I mean, Occam's razor, that seems like an unnecessary complication. I mean, is it because they don't think they could have done this like within a short enough amount of time after the person died to make it practical?
Yes, I think that's what it is.
So they had to like bury them in the meantime while they like set up whatever they were going to do for the sky burial or whatever. Or it's not really a sky burial, but yeah.
Yes. Or maybe. To prevent the like disgustingness that happens when you have a dead body. Yeah, they just bury it. Yeah. And then they dig it up later and once it's all bones, and then they.
Interesting. A resurrection in a sense.
Right.
A resurrection and then an apotheosis. It's very Jesus-like. Don't give me that look. Okay, go.
Some believe that the coffins were lowered down from above, like on top of the cliffs, and then placed. Others think like the opposite, that they were lifted up using scaffolding. And that's what they did. That's what the archaeologists did to get there in the first place. They used like bamboo scaffolding to climb up there and like.
So that's how like modern people have gotten up to these, like, because these are like really high, right?
Yeah, they're like 300 feet.
Jesus. I did cliff diving once. It was like 50 feet and it seemed like real high, like almost too high.
Too much.
So I can't imagine being 6 times higher than that.
Yeah, it's crazy. They're in the sky.
Jesus.
So, perfect segue. These burials brought the spirit closer to the sky and to heaven, to that spirit world.
Right.
It also relates to sky burials that the Tibetans and the Mongolians practiced, where they chop up bodies and offer it to vultures or other animals. So it is literally carried into the sky.
Right.
An apotheosis. Is that the word?
I just like that word, so I say it a bunch.
Did I say the right word?
Yeah, definitely. It's apotheosis is a ascent into the sky.
Yes.
Like Jesus had an apotheosis after the 3 days in the tomb, and then he wasn't there, and the rabbits saw it, and then the rabbits, they could talk before, but then they couldn't talk because, they couldn't tell them about it. You never heard this, like, the story of Easter?
No.
That they, like, made up?
I've never even... Nope, we're not going to go into it.
You never heard that?
No.
Oh, I thought you would have, because you grew up Catholic like me. Anyway. Moving on.
We definitely talked about how there's like a whole generation of people who just grew up Catholic and then just stopped.
Oh, so many.
There's so many.
So many.
So the sites. Let's talk about where these are specifically and what each one really contains. New sites are still being discovered. So in 2015, 131 hanging coffins were discovered in the central province of Hubei. I believe that's how you say that. Placed in man-made caves in a cliff about 165 feet wide and about 330 feet high.
Oh, my God.
So they were enormous. So, again, it begs the question, how did they manage to get them that high? Washi in northern Yunnan, which is a southwestern province of China, the oldest coffins there dated back to the Tang Dynasty. Like I said, 618 to 907.
Okay, AD.
Thousands of years ago. AD, yes. Historians look at the Tang Dynasty like this golden era of riches and glory in Chinese history. It was a high point in Chinese civilization. The Tang records estimate the population to be at about 50 million people.
Wow.
So it was a big, big dynasty. It was huge.
Yeah.
Their funerary practices included providing the deceased with everything they might need in the afterlife. So, like, animals, servants, entertainers.
Because, again, they thought that it continued afterwards, right? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, they believed that the afterlife was sort of parallel to the living world.
I wonder if this has anything to do with the, the clay soldiers.
The terracotta.
The terracotta soldiers. Wasn't that the belief that, like, this ruler would need, like, an army when they went into the afterlife? So they, like, built all these terracotta soldiers.
I believe so.
Because I think originally they were going to have, like, real soldiers just, like, die with them, but then they, like, that wouldn't fly, I guess. So they made these, like, terracotta soldiers. I think that's the story. I saw, like, a History Channel thing on it or something at some point.
Wow. What's his face did that?
Who?
He killed... I don't know the name because I can't think of anything. He died, and then
he died. Yeah,
the soldiers were killed who killed him, and the witnesses who were killed. And his soldier.
I don't know.
So no one knows how he died or something. I don't know.
Okay,
I'm just rambling now.
That's cool.
So many of the coffins that they found had multiple bones from multiple bodies.
Oh.
They were also packed with sand, making them extremely heavy. Now, I'm talking specifically the ones in Washi in northern Yunnan.
Okay.
In China. Because different sites have different findings.
You said it varies quite a bit, right?
Right. So this custom, this specific one, has been tied to the burial custom of the Bo people, like I mentioned earlier. They're a rebellious, I guess, minority tribe that they were in the border between today's southern Sichuan and northwestern Yunnan provinces.
Okay.
It's thought that they disappeared in the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644. And, lots of persecutions.
Right.
I mean, the Bo people are a mystery in and of themselves.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Could that be an episode?
For sure. What really happened to the Bo people is unclear. And it's something that's definitely still being debated today.
Interesting.
And some people even believe that there's sprinkles of them still around.
Right.
Which, that makes a lot of sense to me. So another site are the caskets found in Guizhou Cave. Mario's nodding at me like, great.
You did so good.
Guizhou.
We didn't even have to look that up.
Yep, totally. The Guizhou Cave. And so it's only accessible by river. And how they got there, they made of a again, they use bamboo, and that's rafts made of bamboo, their traditional form of travel.
Bamboo is like one of the most versatile building materials in the world. It's crazy.
I found a lot of benches of bamboo when I was doing my research. Just for really anything. So these were found stacked in a limestone cave on the side of a cliff. So these and lots of them in general aren't well protected. So there were 30 or so of them intact, but the rest were falling apart. And there used to be more than 300, but at one point they were destroyed by a fire. Also, tourists can be a problem.
Yeah.
So some leave banknotes as a respectful offering. Others just throw their cigarettes everywhere.
As a disrespectful offering.
Like, I think this article talked about how, from CNN, how there was, like, a skull with a cigarette in its mouth. Like,
are you Peter Griffin? Come on.
Oh, yeah. It's exactly something Peter Griffin would do.
Well, he did. Remember the episode that's doing, like, the whole poltergeist thing?
Oh,
he finds the skull, and he's, like, horrible.
It happened. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Authorities even put up fake ones to kind of, like...
try to lure people.
Yeah, you guys should go check out the ones over there.
Those are super authentic.
Yeah, while keeping the real ones, like, intact. Another site is the ones in the Philippines. So, the province of Sagada. It's done by members of the Igorot tribe of Mountain Province, this area in the Philippines. And they are the only culture that I found, there could be more, that are still practicing this today. But it's not as often, it's not in the same ways, and it's only once every few years.
Okay.
So
for, like, really special people.
Yes. So in this article, this CNN article by Katie Hunt, she talked to a woman named Soledad Bellingham, and she is part of the tribe. She's 70 and a school teacher. So she says that moving the bodies of the dead higher up brings them closer also to their other ancestors, not just the sky, but the spirits themselves. Quote, there are two fears of being buried. The first is that dogs will eat the corpse, so the coffins are placed high up on a cliff, out of their reach. Secondly, years ago, during the head-hunting days, savages from different parts of Kalinga and eastern Bontoc province, our enemies, would hunt for our heads and take them home as trophy. That's another reason why the dead were buried high up, so nobody could reach them.
Interesting.
That was something I never even
would not
considered,
have thought of
right?
that, yeah.
Interesting.
But basically to, in general, prevent the desecration of the corpse.
Yes, in general.
Because the preservation of the corpse is also seen as important for the preservation of life after death, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So these coffins are tied or nailed to the sides of the cliffs. They're about 3 feet long. The bodies are buried in the fetal position.
Oh.
They believe that a person should depart the world the same way they entered the world. I like that.
Yeah, but there's a nice symmetry to that.
Practically at a safe space.
Right.
So, for their funeral practices, the deceased is put on a wooden sangadil, or death chair. And the corpse is tied with vines and then covered with a blanket. So then they have the deceased on a chair, and then they face the main door of the house, and that's the wake. And the relatives come in, and they pay their respects, and vigils like this can be, like, multiple days. So the cadaver itself is smoked to prevent fast decomposition, and it's also a means to conceal the smell.
Sure.
Before being taken for actual burial, that is when it's secured into the fetal position, and then it's wrapped again in a blanket and tied. Quote, the corpse is wrapped like a basketball. On the way there, mourners do their best to grab it and carry it because they believe it is good luck to be smeared with the dead's blood, end quote. That's from Soledad. So this is true. The fluids from the corpse are thought to bring success and actually like kind of transfer and pass on the skills that the diseased person had onto the living.
Yeah.
Those who came in contact.
Yeah, there's a kind of, logic to that. And it's not uncommon for there to be some kind of idea in cultures of a transference of some kind of essence from one person to another.
Yes.
If you eat their heart, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I learned a lot about funeral rites in this little scourge of
Very
information I
interesting,
went for. So after they have the cadaver in the coffin, the young men of the tribe climb up the cliff and place the corpse in the coffin that they have set up there.
So they set up, in other words, they set up the coffin, they nail it or tie it.
Right.
And then they bring the body up wrapped. Oh, I see. So, and then they put it in there and then they secure the top.
Right.
Oh, okay. That definitely makes more sense than putting it in the coffin and then taking the whole apparatus up there. Yeah.
The bones are cracked to allow it to fit. Then it's wrapped. Soledad says that the bone cracking doesn't happen as much anymore. And the coffins these days are longer because it's something, I guess,
it's seen as
now
a desecration
become,
now.
Right.
Plus, with modern technology, I'm assuming they can do this more easily. They have, like, the, pins and, like, equipment, climbing equipment and stuff, right? Things they didn't have in, like, the 8th century.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. I want to talk about the Toraja people in Indonesia. They also have, they also have hanging coffins found high up in cliffs. But they have this whole funeral. Their funeral rites are incredibly interesting. They're elaborate. They're kind of strange, but it's their culture. It's what they believe. And I'm just gonna put a little animal slaughter blood trigger out there for anybody who doesn't maybe squeamish. So they believe that death isn't sudden, but a slow, gradual process toward what's called puya, or the afterlife. So it's elaborate. They're expensive. The richer and more powerful you were, the more expensive the funeral was. And sometimes they were even held weeks or months or like sometimes even years after the death because the family needs to like gather the funds.
Wow.
And like place their money where it needs to be so they can like do this. So while sometimes during this hiatus, the body is wrapped in cloth and its spirit is believed to roam the village during this time. So in the Aluk religion, which is a form of Hindu. Yes. Okay. Sorry. I was like double checking in my head if that was right.
I do not know.
Well, I don't know. I feel like you know lots of things. So it could have been on your list. That's why I looked. I was like, maybe Mario knows.
Sure.
Only nobles have the right to what is called a death feast. So it's attended by thousands.
Wow.
It lasts several days.
Sounds sweet.
There's music and poems. There's chants.
Yeah.
Sounds like
a good party.
No.
No?
There's crying. There's still crying and wailing. And it's traditional. It is not a celebration.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's an expression of grief. It is an expression of grief.
Yeah.
So there is music, there's chants, there's crying, and there's wailing. But this only happens for nobles. It doesn't happen for young children or poor, low-status adults.
Sure.
Another component of the ritual is the slaughter of the water buffalo. So this is very, very important. The more powerful the person, the more buffalo that are slaughtered.
Oh.
It is believed that the journey to Puya will be quicker if they have lots of buffalo.
Yeah, more buffalo power gets you to, what is it called?
I mean, wool.
Puya?
Puya. Form of transportation, wool, meat.
Yeah, friendship.
It's all there.
Yeah.
All you need.
What was it? Fred the Bison from last episode?
Frank
Frank the Bison?
Oh, poor Frank.
I mean, maybe he could be one of your bison, you know.
Surprised bison.
Yeah.
These are buffalo.
Oh, excuse me. Didn't mean to mix up your buffalo with your bison.
Furry and like way cuter than bison.
Honestly, do not know the difference between them.
Buffalo are kind of cute. Okay, we're moving on. The slaughter of the water buffalo.
Okay.
It is the height of the death feast. Mm-hmm. Here there is music and there's dancing and they're slaughtering buffalo and they slaughter hundreds of pigs. They slaughter tens of buffalo and hundreds of pig was the description. Like,
wow,
beheading and all this crazy stuff. There's music and dancing, and there's young boys who catch spurting blood in long bamboo tubes.
Oh.
Another integral part of the ceremony is the cockfight. So it's considered sacred because it involves the spilling of blood onto the earth. In particular, the tradition requires the sacrifice of at least 3, but it's more common for there to be 25 pairs of chickens to be set against each other.
Sure, I mean, why ceremony. Go with 3 when you can have 25?
Maybe it's probably much easier to breed chickens than it was a long time ago when those rules were written.
Yeah,
or
I don't know.
Put into context.
But the chickens that we breed nowadays couldn't be involved in a cockfight because they're too fucking huge. They can't move.
Yeah.
You know. Either way, they're being horribly mistreated, so probably shouldn't do either.
Okay, so there are 3 methods of burial. The coffin may be laid in a cave, or in a carved stone grave, or hung on a cliff. So they are filled with possessions. They put things in there that they might need in the afterlife. Same idea. In some areas, a stone cave is found, like a huge cave is found that has like families, large enough to fit a whole family. Mm-hmm. They even have cute little statues. They're carved out of wood called tau tau. And that's usually placed in the cave, and they look out over the land. So the coffin of a baby or a child may be hung from ropes sometimes on the face of a cliff or from a tree. These hanging graves last for a while, years, until they rot and the coffin just tumbles to the ground.
Right, not a permanent solution.
In the ritual called Manene, that takes place each year in August. The bodies of the deceased, so they're exhumed, and then they're washed, groomed, and dressed in new clothes. And these mummies are often walked around the village.
Wow. That is some intense appreciation of your ancestors.
There's a lot.
Okay.
There's a lot.
That's a lot.
With the slaughtering and the blood catching.
And they do that every year. That's crazy.
Yeah. Lots.
Wow.
I couldn't leave that out, you know.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a good tidbit.
So, in general, these coffins have been difficult to protect. I kind of touched on this earlier. Mm-hmm. So, in Matangba, Sichuan, it's the most popular site to see these coffins. So, they're protected as, quote, natural cultural relics, end quote. But even though they're 300 feet off the ground, they've been looted before. Archaeology...
People are idiots.
It's crazy. Archaeology in China is well-funded. It's well-regarded. But for this reason, this study, it's been kind of neglected.
Well, archaeology and the study of ancient cultures in China, it kind of goes both ways from what I've heard. It is well-funded. Like, the sciences are generally very well-funded in China. But it's also like you have to hew to the party line, right? If you're looking into things that maybe are unfortunate or that the party doesn't want you, the Communist Party doesn't want you to learn about, then you're not going to get funded. You know, like with Chershin Man that I talked about before. You know,
right?
Like they don't really care to look into, you know, the sort of whether or not, Sherichan Man is like,
The ID.
Whatever, this Western, person who came over, or if it's like tied to the Uyghurs or whatever, it's like they're not going to fund that.
And what's interesting about all of this information all of the resources and knowledge that we know, it's usually based on individual sites rather than the practice as a whole. So it's more like people know about this site and people know about this site, but they don't really know about all of them or both of them. Or
Interesting.
Yes.
So no one's really put together like a theory of what this meant in the wider context of these cultures.
Right. And I think it's because there are so many reasons and there are so many ways that a certain culture or religion can look at it and justify it.
Yeah.
But there are archaeologists who have been fighting to restore the coffins and put more emphasis on them.
Cool.
That's it. That's all I've got for the hanging coffins. So I have a CNN article by Katie Hunt, of course, Wikipedia, the Hanging Coffins Wiki, and the Toraja People Wiki, and a roughguides.com article by Kiki Deer.
Cool.
Those are my sources.
Nice sources. Okay, I'm going to do this week.
Segue.
My segue to my topic is... Okay, so I'm going to do the Antikythera mechanism. The Antikythera mechanism. So
Antikythera.
Antikythera.
It's not Antikythera?
Antikythera.
Where's the emphasis?
I'm not entirely sure.
Antikythera.
It's a small island.
I always thought it was Antikythera.
It is not.
Okay.
It's a small island which is near the island of Kythera. So that's, I think, why it's called Antikythera, because it's like right next to it. But it's just like this little island. And it is in the Aegean Sea. So this is, on the sort of, western edge of like Greece, right? So it's in ancient Greece. And there, was a, okay, so it's going to sort of set the scene here. So spring 1900, a group of...
Yeah, set the scene.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story here, okay? So that's how I'm going to start it. Okay.
Story time, yeah.
This is story time, okay. So spring 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were returning from a sponge dive that they had done
diving.
in North Africa. I don't know whether they met, SpongeBob. It doesn't say. I'm not sure. No? Is that not funny? Okay, cool. That's totally fine. Okay, so when they were coming back from North Africa, they encountered this, like, terrible storm, right? And they had to seek refuge. So what they found was a little lee, so a sort of area outside of the wind and storm and everything, on the small island of Antikythera. And once the storm had passed and everything was okay the next day or whatever, one of the divers, Elias Stadiatis, said, sort of decided that he was going to suit up and go down and look for giant clams. The idea being, that they could have like a celebratory feast with these giant clams. Sounds pretty sweet. And he went down to the sea floor, which is pretty deep in that area. And what Elias found was a cliff about 140 feet down that went, even further, like down into darkness.
Wait, an underwater cliff?
An underwater cliff. So he kind of saw that, right? And then he looked a different way, and he saw this huge ancient shipwreck.
Whoa.
And at first, he was like super fucking creeped out.
Hell yeah, I'd be like, what?
Well, not only because of the shipwreck, but also because he thought that he saw human remains like all around him, like dismembered human remains.
What?
Now,
like bones?
He realized when he brought one of the arms up that it was actually bronze and that these were actually statues and not human bodies.
Oh my god, that would be so scary.
Although there have subsequently, like many years later, been human remains found from the wreck. So, not that there aren't human remains associated with the Antikythera wreck, but not right at the beginning.
Bronze statues.
Lots of bronze statues. So several months later, those same divers, the sponge divers, got a contract from the Greek government to return and explore and extract what they could of the ancient wrecks. Took them about 10 months in that initial excavation. And this was actually reportedly the first large-scale underwater archaeological excavation ever in the world that we know about.
All in the pursuit of clams.
Yes, all for the love of clams, if not for the love of clams. So the sponge divers discovered, a lot of marble and bronze sculptures, a lot of coins, a lot of these things called amphorae, which are like jars that typically held like wine and stuff, and just a lot of other artifacts. But what they also discovered, they didn't know it at first, was one of the greatest modern mysteries of science. Woo! The Antikythera Mechanism. Dun, 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 dun. So this was a strange device that was recovered from this ancient Greek shipwreck. And, the ship itself was, just so you understand, was enormous. This is probably part of what contributed to it going down, was that it was overladen with treasure, which is so cool, right? There's like, it's probably the site that has yielded the most from ancient Greeks.
Wow.
That's
of
amazing.
Any.
And it's been they've gone back to it over the years.
Can you imagine those the people on the ship? I bet they're just like drinking and having a great fucking time because their ship is filled with gold.
Right. That's funny. And the ship itself was really, really big. It was about 50 meters long, which is about 164 feet. It's about half a football field. Jesus. So it was a huge, huge ship, considering that this ship went down in about 70 to 60 BCE.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is in the first century before the turn, right? Before year zero.
Right.
And it's been dated pretty to a pretty high degree of certitude, because coins have been found with dates, which is always like the best way, right? Because it literally guaranteed. Says like in the whatever years that this person was the emperor or whatever, and then you look it up and it's like, it's those years. Okay, there you go. Can't have been any later than this.
Wow.
Exactly. And one historian, just to kind of highlight the importance of the Antikythera Mechanism discovery, said that the Antikythera Mechanism was, quote, the single most information-rich object that has been uncovered by archaeologists from ancient times, close quote. And I'll kind of explain over the course of these two episodes, because I'm going to do a two-parter, why this is the case, why it's valid to say that. And why we've gotten so much information out of this device. And while the precise origins and intent, precisely of it do remain a mystery, people generally consider it to be the world's oldest computer, right? So if you were telling me this earlier, right? That's the one thing you've heard about it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you've heard about the Antikythera Mechanism, that's the one thing you've heard about it. That's an ancient computer. But what does that mean? Right. We'll get into all of that. So it's really, really interesting for a nerd such as myself.
Antikythera, play Despacito.
Right. Not the Justin Bieber version. And many people have spent pretty much their entire careers trying to figure out the mystery of the Antikythera Mechanism. Yeah, it holds it's just so cryptic. And because of the work of all those people, spending their careers looking into this, right, for us, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your service to science. And, science, we now have a pretty good understanding of, how it was supposed to work, kind of what it did, how one could use it. But there is a lot that is still a mystery. Okay, so but before we get kind of too into all of that, though, I just kind of wanted to mention what it actually looks like. Okay, yes. in the state in which it was actually found,
looks like a brick.
It looked like a big mess. Really, it was, of course, over 2,000 years old. It had been sitting there at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. It had become encrusted, corroded, calcified, crushed. What's another word that starts with C? I don't know.
Coddled. No.
It was not coddled precisely. But anyway, it was at first deemed simply item 15087. It was mostly bronze, like a lot of what was salvaged from the wreck, because bronze will persist in that environment, although it will become corroded. And it was, upon first inspection, according to a New Yorker story that I read, a, quote, shoebox-sized lump of bronze, which appeared to have a wooden exterior. Inside were what seemed to be fused metal pieces, but the bronze was so encrusted with barnacles and calcium that it was difficult to tell what it was. Close quote. So they didn't know exactly what it was, but it didn't look like much of anything. It used to be housed within a wooden box. It was about 13.5 by 7 by 3.5 inches, just to kind of give you an idea. People say it's about the size of a laptop computer. Oddly enough, that's kind of like what it kind of would have looked like.
It's much bigger than I was thinking it was. I thought it would be able to fit in my hand.
No, not that small, but it was pretty small. It was very mobile.
Cool.
Yeah. And, this weird-looking artifact was, like I said, not really that immediately exciting to the divers or to the archaeologists. The statuary was what really got people going. The marble, the bronze.
Okay.
I think another important thing to understand is that the bronze statuary that's survived from the Grecian, the Hellenistic period, is mostly from shipwrecks. Apparently, a lot of the bronze, like almost all of the bronze, was melted down and recycled over and over again throughout the centuries. So any bronze statuary that was made like back in ancient Greek times would have been melted down hundreds or thousands of years ago. Which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that.
That's insane.
Yeah. Just like, masterpieces that would be invaluable today. Somebody just, like, melted them down and made, cannon balls out of them or whatever, It's, like, insane. You said the word insane.
Yes.
Insane. It was insane, though. I think so. That's a good word for it. And, again, I think what you have to understand is we couldn't see into this. So when you look at it, look up if you can, look up a picture of it right now. Go to Google, put in Antikythera Mechanism. You can see kind of a wheel on the front of it, right? So you can tell there's some kind of wheel or something. And you can kind of see what looks kind of like a gear on it. And, obviously that's kind of intriguing. But they really couldn't see into it to see really what was going on. So after about a year or two of it just sitting in a drawer somewhere, a Greek archaeologist named Spiridon Stais re-examined item 15087 and saw that its wooden exterior had split and that it had kind of fallen into a few different fragments, which ranged from just over an inch to 6.5 inches long. And over the years, the mechanism would continue to deteriorate into different fragments. Stais saw a bronze dial, now that it had kind of opened up, with an inscription in ancient Greek about 2 millimeters high. Very small, but very precise Greek lettering.
What'd it say?
We'll get into we'll get into a lot of that too, and that's one of the reasons why, again, they talk about this as being such an information-rich artifact because of the writing that's there as well. There were also these very precisely cut triangular teeth, reminiscent, honestly, of a mechanical clock. A mechanical clock. The kind of mechanical clock that wouldn't really be seen until, like, the 14th century. Like, 1,400 years after this thing would have existed. So it's sort of this thing out of time. He realized from the very beginning, Stais, that this should not have existed because the precision gearing, we did not think that it was possible to create that without the kind of technology that they had before the 14th century.
Wow.
And because of
we got a messed up timeline.
Exactly. It's what's called prochronistic, something that's too advanced.
I like that word.
Seemingly. Exactly. You've heard anachronistic, right? Something that appears, out of time in the sense that it's, old-timey, but prochronistic, the opposite. It's too advanced for its time. There were kind of two main theories, main approaches to this analysis in the early days. Some people like J.N. Spheronos, so many cool Greek names in this,
right?
Of the National Museum were in the camp that said that this was a kind of astrolabe. Okay, so an
that's
that's what I was immediately going to talk about. Okay, so that's okay. So an astrolabe is a time-telling device that can also be used in ship navigation in astronomy. So it was a way to keep, constant time so that you could measure where, the movement of the stars and relative to your position.
Oh,
Therefore,
okay.
you could tell, by triangulation how far you had gone and therefore where you were on a map, right? And this kind of device, an astrolabe, was known to have been used at least by the 8th century. AD. And other so in opposition to this view of the astrolabe, other researchers like Albert Rehm, a German philologist, a language expert,
cool,
philologist, thought that this view was undervaluing what the mechanism really was. He thought that it might be what's called an orrery, or even the fabled sphere of Archimedes, which is a particular orrery. So an orrery is a mechanical model of the solar system, which can tell the positions and the movements of, the sun, planets, moons. So a way to visually represent the movement of the different celestial bodies, and therefore, kind of predict their positions in the future, right? And this is kind of the idea of what the potential of the Antikythera mechanism could have been. So research on the Antikythera mechanism unfortunately kind of languished. After those first few years, there wasn't too much more that they could really say about it, because again, they couldn't really see what was in there and examine it in any meaningful way. So the astrolabe hypothesis kind of held sway for the next 50 years or so.
Okay.
Till we get to the 1950s, when some acknowledgement of the possibility, that this kind of ancient machine of this kind of complexity, kind of was allowed to take any sort of hold. Before this, people said, okay, this is probably some more modern mechanism that got dropped onto the shipwreck, so you're just kind of like saying, that doesn't really make sense because of the way it was found. It was under a lot of other stuff that was clearly from that age. That was from the wreck, and it was dated to these particular. So we know that it was from the first century BCE, but people just didn't want to admit that, right? That there could have been this kind of like modern looking thing that came from so long ago, and the whole idea of a sophisticated ancient technology was kind of discredited in the culture at that time. But there was one researcher who was really intrigued by the mechanism and was sophisticated enough to realize, the true implications of what it could be.
I have so many questions, but I already know you're going to answer them.
Sure. If I don't answer them, I guess save them for next time. Maybe I'll answer them next time. Because I'm definitely going to do a two-parter. So that one researcher, who kind of like was that visionary who saw was Derek de Sola Price. Derek de Sola Price, and his name comes up over and over and over again when you research this topic. Price was a polymath, an expert at many, many things. And he was mainly trained in physics, but was also a pioneering professor in the history of science. And Price examined the mechanism beginning in 1958 and continued to be engaged with it until his death in 1983 from a heart attack. And that year, 1983, is kind of that'll serve as kind of a midpoint where we'll pause for this episode and pick it back up next time. Price subscribed to the hypothesis that the mechanism is a type of ancient computer.
Yeah.
Right. So he was finally, we finally got to that point where they're like, okay, maybe this could be
80s.
some kind of, no, so the 50s.
He died in 83.
Yeah, he started looking into
got
it in the 50s. And of course, by this time, computers had been a thing for a while, right? Charles Babbage conceived of the first kind of modern computer in, what was the 1870s or something. And, modern punch card computers were starting to be used, beginning, maybe in like the 20s or something, or the 30s, I'm not sure. So I think it's interesting to think about how we kind of had to catch back up with this whole concept of using a machine to calculate. From 2,000 years, we finally got back to the point where we were like, oh yeah, maybe it's this thing that's kind of like a computer,
Yeah.
But maybe they thought about it that way in ancient Greece too.
That's so weird.
Whoever made this thing obviously knew it was doing calculations. So essentially, what was a computer? It's just so cool.
It's kind of interesting that we haven't found another.
Yes, and we'll definitely talk about that too, and how we kind of have.
Ooh.
So Price, he like I said, was definitely open to the idea of this being a very sophisticated device, which would have been used to predict future astronomical phenomena, a kind of super astrolabe with a predictive, ability. And Price found that the markings on the device that he could see were calendrical. They showed the days, the months, etc. And he surmised that there must have been pointers.
Calendar.
It's a calendar, exactly. That there must have been pointers, like on a clock, that had since been lost. And then this is the main thing that people think now. And Price also figured out that the mechanism, how it worked in terms of the gears. And he saw that the largest gear clearly represented the solar motion. So, one time around the sun was one time around the gear.
And they would kind of figure all this out based on how long it took to do one rotation?
Right, and how many gears there are is how long it takes to do one rotation, which you then map onto the actual movement of the sun.
Oh, wow.
And then the other gears represent other things.
That's very complicated.
And we'll get into the specifics of that in episode 2. But yes, by counting the number of teeth on the gears, which sometimes was kind of in contention, because obviously a lot of these gears have been broken off, so you can only count so many. One was able to calculate, and particularly the Price was able to calculate the motion and presumably the maker's idea of the motion of the celestial bodies. But unfortunately, like I said, many of the teeth were missing, and many, many more were hidden within the mechanism. So we had to kind of wait until, technology caught up, and in 1971, the first X-rays were made of the mechanism. So this kind of marks the beginning of the modern, research into the Antikythera Mechanism.
What did they find?
So with the X-rays, Price and other investigators, they could see most of the hidden teeth. So at that point, they could pretty much count up the teeth that were in there. And Price developed schematics of what he thought the mechanism would have looked like and actually made a model of it. So for the first time, we actually had a working model of what a person in the ancient world may have actually dealt with, in their hands, which is pretty cool. So Price summed up his findings this way, quote, "Nothing like this instrument is preserved elsewhere. Nothing comparable to it is known from any scientific text or literary allusion. On the contrary, from all that we know of science and technology in the Hellenistic age, we should have felt that such a device could not exist." Close quote. And I'll just point out that the no literary allusion, part, that's not actually quite true. I'll get into this,
Oh.
but there are actual literary allusions to devices like this, particularly by Cicero in ancient Rome, a few hundred years after the Antikythera shipwreck, but two devices of this kind. So Price's thought was that his discovery would have this huge impact, right, on the history of science. Like I said, he was like a historian of science, right, one of the sort of, trailblazers of that field, and society's perception of ancient Greek technology, he felt, should have been fundamentally altered by this discovery, right?
Yeah.
In a way that we kind of now think, but that's not how people thought
When they...
in the early 70s, like when
Okay.
he first came out with this. He came out with this big treatise about it in 1974, and it just kind of fell flat. Did not have the impact that he thought it should have. And he also thought that there must have been other mechanisms like that, like the Antikythera mechanism out there, right? Obviously, this is part of the mystery. Why is there not? The thinking is that a sophisticated mechanism like this would not have been the first and only one ever made, right? It would be way too implausible that this would have been the first attempt at something like this, right? It's way too complicated to be the first. There must have been simpler precedents which are just not extant. Like, almost everything from the ancient world is not extant, most of it at some point was burned or destroyed or whatever. It's just how things go. So, in reference, though, to Price's treatise, it didn't have the impact that he thought it would, like I said. Partly, this was probably because of the kind of intellectual, indifference and inertia of the time. This did not fit the mold of what people thought ancient cultures and ancient technology should have looked like at all, and therefore it was kind of ignored. But it was also unfortunately mixed up with this whole ancient aliens thing that we've mentioned before, and this guy named Eric von Däniken, whom I believe we've also mentioned before, who wrote Chariots of the Gods. And unfortunately, Eric von Däniken kind of sullied this whole notion of the Antikythera mechanism. But just to make perfectly clear, it has nothing to do with that. And it never did. It was just like a misunderstanding. So like, it has nothing to do with ancient aliens. Just if you were wondering, it just doesn't. It doesn't.
Aliens?
No, it doesn't. Okay, so once again, though, the research languished. But while the Antikythera mechanism was on display, which it was, kind of continuously, right, at the National Museum in Athens, it did catch the eye of my favorite scientist, one Richard Feynman, the eminent physicist. And it was literally something about which Feynman wrote home. So, it was like remarkable for him in that way. And he wrote to his family that on the whole, the National Museum was, quote, slightly boring because we have seen so much of that stuff before, except for one thing. Among all those art objects, there was one thing so entirely different and strange that it is nearly impossible. It was recovered from the sea in 1900 and is some kind of machine with gear trains, very much like the inside of a modern wind-up alarm clock, close quote. So, people like Richard Feynman could see, like, there's something here. Like, there's more to this than they're telling us. It's not just some astrolabe. Like, it's something really, really, worth looking more into. But unfortunately, the researchers at the museum at that time, they really just ignored it. They just really didn't care. They were kind of puzzled, actually, by Feynman's fascination with it. When he asked, like, more questions about it, they were like, why do you want to know about that? It's super boring.
They just
like,
thought it was, a clock? Or
they thought it was basically just a simple clock. And they didn't think that the gears were what they were, but they obviously were. And not only did it, though, catch the attention of Richard Feynman, it also caught the attention of a young boy named Xenophon Musas, who will come back in episode 2, a little cliffhanger, And Xenophon could identify with Feynman's fascination. He would go there every day, pretty much, to just stare at the Antikythera Mechanism, this little boy, and, wonder kind of sparking in him. And this created a lifelong interest in ancient engineering. He eventually became part of the team researching the Antikythera Mechanism later on. So we'll kind of get back to him as well. But just as a little prelude to what we'll get into in part 2, which is the second half of the research. So, a lot more X-rays and deeper analysis and detail about how the mechanism works, who made it, when was it made, all that kind of stuff. We'll get into a lot of detail. So that, but I mean, we're already at almost 1:15 now. So I think that was enough for one episode. Okay, so that was it.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a big thing. It's actually there's a lot more to it than you would think.
I had no idea there was so much more to it.
There's a lot, and there's more to it even than I'm going to talk about, And just to talk about my sources a little bit. So I kind of had a lot. So I got kind of into looking at this one. It was really interesting. John Seabrook at the New Yorker got a lot of information from that. Wikipedia, of course, the Antikythera Mechanism page, amongst others. A BBC documentary titled The 2,000-Year-Old Computer Decoding the Antikythera Mechanism. Joe Marchant at Smithsonian, Sarah Kaplan at the Washington Post, Ian Sample at The Guardian, Brian Resnick at Vox, Trevor at Atlas Obscura, James McDonald at JSTOR, and a National Geographic documentary entitled The World's Oldest Computer.
It seems like you got a lot of good...
Yeah, there's a lot of good information about it out there. But yeah, when we were talking about it earlier, I told you how long my write-up was, and we decided I should probably do 2 parts.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't want to skimp, but I also didn't want to overload everybody. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. We so much appreciate it, and I particularly get tickled every time I see a new listen on there.
You get, huh?
I get tickled. I get all, I get happy. It makes me happy. So I appreciate it. Everybody. We very much appreciate it. All our listeners all over the world. I think it's so cool that we get listeners from all different countries.
Every time I think about it, I'm just like, the internet. Like
I know, that's what I love. I love the internet because
that's just where it comes back to.
I can say something, and then in like 2 minutes, someone in Australia could be listening to it. It's not this because we're recording this on Sunday, but you a lot of times we're recording it right before.
Shout out to all my college students.
Yep.
School starts.
Yep, going back tomorrow, right?
Back to school.
For you, yeah, over here at ISU. So, the Redbirds, the coolest of mascots.
Well,
I say that my mascot for my undergrad was the Wildcats. It's like the most generic one.
Wildcats, when you're head of High School Musical.
I've not seen High School Musical. So
I have weird shit in the news. Do you have weird shit in the news?
I think maybe I do. Okay, you go, and then I'll see if I do.
So I wanted to talk about this drug tunnel that was found in Arizona. Now, this has been, I believe, the 3rd tunnel that they found within a month, and it kind of comes right in between this border wall debate.
Right.
So this was along the Arizona border, and they suspect that it was used to smuggle drugs and people across the U.S.-Mexico border. So, it's the 3rd time that they had made such a discovery in less than a month. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's underneath a manhole, underneath drainage channels, below the downtown areas of the Twin Cities of Nogales.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. And I think it's about 35 feet long. Yes, wait. 25 feet long and 2 to 3 feet high. So you're
2
hunching.
to 3 feet high. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be pretty
very
scary.
small.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely people, I mean, wherever there are border walls, people create tunnels under the border walls. It's pretty ubiquitous. I mean, if the conditions allow it. But it's, yeah, that's definitely a feature of the Mexican. Yeah, it's pretty...
It's the world we live in.
You know,
world.
it's a not... It's an issue that one could anticipate with a border wall construction. Now, you could say, okay, we'll just build it down too, right? It's really expensive.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive.
Because then you got to break ground.
Yeah, and you have to, yeah, exactly. You know, it's just so much more involved. You know, I guess we don't really need to get into a whole thing, right? But, you know. I mean, I have many thoughts about this, obviously.
Mario has many thoughts on...
About many things. Then that's what
many things that have to do with politics.
And that's what we're thinking kind of about doing for... You know, because we haven't been doing the weird shit extras... time and life.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to y'all.
But, you know, I don't think we're gonna do them because it just didn't take off. You know, it didn't seem like something that we should keep doing.
Right.
But we're thinking about what else we should do because we want to, you know, make the Patreon page more of a, you know, thing and give y'all more content. We know that's part of being a pro podcaster. You have to make, you know, lots of content, extra content.
Hang out with us.
You know, we want to invite you to hang out with us as we talk about all the stuff that we talk about when we're not doing the pod, which is...
for real, I mean...
You know, me talking at you about politics, culture, the news, you know, whatever. You know, I think we're just going to talk about whatever for a while. And that'll be it.
We'll see what happens.
And we'll do it every couple of weeks.
I kind of want it to be... The springboard, though, is politics. Because...
Sure.
There's just so much out there now,
Sure.
and, you know, 2-3 years ago, I would not have thought about doing this at all. Things have definitely changed. Things are changing. Times are changing.
Times are changing?
Times are a-changing.
Times they are a-changing? Bob Dylan? No?
No.
You hate Bob Dylan?
I don't like Bob Dylan.
The times they are a-changing.
Most people love Bob. Dude, you can cut all this out. What's our exit going to be?
I'm going to keep it all. I guess I don't know.